Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the second part of our second podcast. Before Hans and I get into the podcast, we're going to give you some news updates. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome, welcome. Do not fear the door that lies before you. We will protect you. We are your guides, Hans and Lou, and we will give you the latest in Stephen King news. But before we do so, you must prove yourself worthy. You must open the door and join us in the death room. Hi everyone, we're back with the news, and leading off the top, we have some good news and we have some bad news, but thankfully it's mostly good news with one horrible news item. But let's go through the good news stuff first. First off, a public appearance by Stephen King this December 7th at Songas, I believe that's pronounced correctly, TSONGAS Center at UMass in Lowell, Massachusetts. He will be there on December 7th doing a reading and a question and answer period, and his tickets for that go on sale on June 1st. So take a look for that. You can find a post about it on Lilja's site and the link to how to order tickets if you're one of those people that is in the area and that is fortunate enough to go. And I highly recommend it. I've been to two of his, and he is a fantastic public speaker.
Definitely, and no one reads his books like he does. So you should definitely check it out. And my guess is that if you do, you'll hear part of Dr. Sleep, since that's the next book coming up.
Right, I agree with you, and I'm really looking forward to that sequel to The Shining.
Yeah, from what we've heard so far, it sounds very good.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, Carrie, the remake, is getting more and more names to it. And as we've mentioned before, that Julianne Moore was in the talks for doing Margaret White, and it's now been confirmed that she will do the part. And also, Gabrielle Wilde will join the cast and play Sue Snell. So that should be interesting. And we also hear that Alex Russell and Ansel Elgort are in talks to join the cast, and that's the first male cast we've heard of. Not sure who they will play, but the cast is getting better and better, so I might have to reconsider my negative thoughts about this one.
That's good. I know you were dragging your feet a little when this first news came out, and understandably so, because there's been some sequels to the original Carrie and TV projects that didn't turn out well at all. But yeah, the signing of Julianne Moore really raises the profile of this project, I think, in a lot of people's minds, mine included. When you get an actress of that caliber coming onto the project, that's very exciting. So filming starts in Toronto, I believe in June. So it's going to start up shortly, and hopefully we'll get some good on-the-set reports from other media outlets in the next couple of months.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Absolutely. And next, Stephen King story, Afterlife, reported a while ago on the stephenking.com as another potential comic project that Stephen King was looking into after his experiences with American Vampire. But we haven't really heard much more beyond that, and we know the story's done, but that's about it.
Yeah, this was mentioned on the message board on the official King site that the story is actually done. So if it's done as in text form, it might be released as a short story, or it might be released as a comic later on. We don't know that, but it's done anyway. Next up, Dr. Sleep is getting a release date, or at least we thought so. It was reported on both Amazon, King's official site, Simon & Schuster's site, that would be released on January 15 next year. But almost as soon as it hit the net that it was going to be released, it was revoked. And the only release date we have now from King's official site is next year. Both on Amazon and Simon & Schuster, the title has been removed, so we really don't know what's going on there, but it seems like someone jumped the gun on this one.
Absolutely. And yeah, I can't ever remember a Stephen King project being released in January. And I'm sure somebody's going to pipe in and say, oh, yes, this was released, but I don't remember it. His work is usually released in time for the summer or for the holiday season, for the Christmas season. So I'm thinking more likely that, or I'm hoping that it will be released early spring next year, maybe in April, but I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't until November.
Yeah, it's pretty safe to say that it will be later than January 15 at least. So
Absolutely.
we got a nice message from Ron Howard on Twitter about the Dark Tower. He mentioned that he spent the day in a story session on the Dark Tower with a meeting with Akiva Goldman and Erica Huggins, and he's really not saying that much, but it was a positive meeting and no timetable yet, but so it seems like it's still alive.
Yes, which is great because this is a project that I know a lot of people have mixed thoughts about whether or not it should be adapted for the screen. I'm a big fan of doing it. It's like Stephen King said, if they try to do an adaptation of my work and it doesn't turn out, the book is still there on the shelf to enjoy. And I'd rather see that the shot taken to film this and than not. I mean, Lord of the Rings turned out fantastically, and if the Dark Tower could capture any of that kind of magic, that would really be awesome. I would really love to see this happen. I know there's a lot of logistical problems, and it's not as a wide appeal as Lord of the Rings. But for myself, I would love to see them try.
Yeah, same here. The real problem that I see is that it spans over such a long time that it will be hard to keep the actors looking the same, and they will grow and everything. So it will be hard to make it, but I hope they do.
And in related Dark Tower news, because of the recent release of the Wind Through the Keyhole, there's been an update to the Dark Tower Complete Concordance written by Robin Firth, and we're assuming that the new material has to do with the Wind Through the Keyhole, and that is scheduled to be released on June 1st of this year. And in Haven news, the Stephen King Colorado-based sci-fi TV series, we have two release dates to talk about. The first is the DVD Blu-ray release for the second season, and that is scheduled for September the 11th of this year. And the season 3 premiere of Haven has been scheduled on Sci-Fi for September 21st, which is a bit of a disappointment for me because the last two seasons were summer releases, and Haven was a show that if it had not been released as a summer series, I probably wouldn't have been as interested in it as I am now because it got off to such a slow start. So the fact that we have to wait now till the fall is disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. My guess is that they didn't make it to this summer and didn't want to wait to the next summer, and then they had to go for the fall season.
Yeah, and September 21st also happens to be Stephen King's birthday, so that's, I guess, a nice tie-in, but I still would have preferred it to come on during the summer months. And this is a series that initially I wasn't that crazy about, but as the showrunners found their footing and the characters became more fleshed out, I really enjoyed this series.
Yeah, it's getting better and better, and you have to wonder if September 21st is just a coincidence or if they planned it like that.
Hmm. I wonder.
Yeah. And I got an email from Mark Pavia, most known as the director of Night Flyer, and he told me that he's working on the Stephen King anthology movie The Reaper's Image, and which includes 4 stories: Mile 81, N, The Monkey, and Reaper's Image. And he had some touches on the last script, and then he was ready to start shooting. So that sounds very promising, and to quote him, it's awesome, all of it, so damn scary, end quote. So sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. And you gotta love it when somebody's enthused about what they're doing. So I'm really looking forward to this. I like anthology style series, so to get an anthology movie on Stephen King's short stories would be great. And this is a great mix. 2 of these stories are from Night Shift, and 2 of them are more recent. The Mile 81 and N are the more recent ones. The Monkey and the Reaper's Image one's from 1969 originally, the Reaper's Image, and the other one's from 1980, I believe. And both of them were packaged into the Night Shift anthology. So it's a great mix of stories. There's not really a weak one in the bunch that I can see. So, and they're all very cinematic. So it should be a lot of fun to see these brought to the screen.
Yeah, and if Mark is doing the same great job he did with the Night Flyer, I'm sure we'll have a nice movie.
Yes, I agree. I thought The Night Flyer was a nifty little thriller flick, and the lead actor, Miguel Ferrer, did a great job.
Yeah, definitely.
Alrighty. And so Hans was feeling a little worried about Carrie, but he's feeling better about that now. But I think he's got a new thing to get upset about, and that would be our last bit of news, which falls under the bad news category, and that is a TV series based on the movie The Lawnmower Man. And we're both kind of shaking our heads at this one, eh, Hans?
Yeah, it's a horrible idea. I can't see why anyone would come up with this idea. Must be really slow time now in idea room.
Yeah, off air, you made an interesting point about the history of the original Lawnmower Man, Stephen King.
Yeah, Steven sued them to so that they couldn't use his name in the title anymore. So assuming that the TV series is based on that movie, they can't use Stephen King's name in the title for the TV series as well. So this is not a way to make money out of Stephen King's name. So I really can't see why they're doing this. Why they think anybody would want to see this.
Yeah, and without that, who's going to know about this project? They don't know where the original source material came from, so they'll lose that. I mean, I think it's made a big difference for a show like Haven. Probably wouldn't have survived if it wasn't able to put that attachment with Stephen King to it.
Yeah, I agree. And the original movie, when it was released, was quite new with all this virtual reality and stuff. But I don't
Yeah.
think anyone's getting very impressed by that today.
No, and the original movie had very little to do with the original story too. So,
Yeah, it was
uh,
only the title.
yeah. Well, I think there was a lawnmower in it too, but that was about it.
Yeah, okay. That and the title.
Yeah. Alrighty, so there you go. That's our news.
Yeah.
This is great. What's our job? We'd like drive around, pick up stiffs or what?
It's time for reviews from the night shift.
We are going to talk a bit about Wind Through the Keyhole, Stephen King's latest book. With us is Bev Vincent, who are going to give us his view on the book as well. I don't know about you two, but I really liked this one. It felt right at home to be back with Roland and the gang. Did you get the same feeling?
Yes, absolutely. The book doesn't spend a whole lot of time with the gang. There's a little bit of the beginning and the ending, but it just feels, natural to revisit them, especially given that the story takes place in the middle of the Dark Tower series. This isn't something that happens at the end or continues on. So King was able to recapture where Roland and Eddie and Susanna and Jake were emotionally at that time in the story, which I think has to be something that's a little bit difficult to do. The characters evolve in your mind as you write further about them, than to go back and make another snapshot of them from a time before Caliber and Sturgis and before Algol Ciento and all that stuff happens. I think it's quite skillfully done.
Yeah, I agree. It's like pulling on your old favorite sweater or favorite pair of lounge pants. The Dark Tower novels, there's a certain language, style of writing that King uses when he writes these books, and you're into it immediately within the first paragraph or two. And if you go into it knowing that you're not spending, if you don't take the Dark Tower to mean that you're going to be spending a lot of time with the main characters, but you're going to be spending a lot of time in that world again, it's quite an enjoyable read, and the structure of the book is quite clever too, to do a story within a story within a story. So I really enjoyed revisiting with these characters, and it nicely expanded some of the mythos of the Dark Tower universe as well.
Personally, I thought I was going to miss not having so much about Roland and the others, but I really liked Tim and his adventures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I mean, that's really the exciting epic quest of the book, is Tim Stoutheart and his quest to go off to find something to help his mother. There's a talisman parallel to it. The young boy going on the magic elixir to cure his mother. It's a little bit of a different concept of what the problem is and how he's going to solve it and where he goes to do it. But there's the parallel to that sort of a story. But the things that happen to him while he goes through the endless forest are quite delightful, and they're, in a way it's a fairy tale, and even with a fairy, although she's not a very nice fairy. But it's an adult tale too, because a lot of the stuff that happens to him, it's not a child's adventure. He ends up in some real serious jeopardy on a number of occasions, and it's a fast-moving, compact, tightly written adventure story, and it could have stood on its own, absent everything else around it. Sort of like an Eyes of the Dragon type of a story, but it has then the added significance that it was a story that Roland knew as a young boy that he's telling to encourage another young boy who's just had a terrible loss. And then, to have Roland the Elder telling another story of Roland as a young man fills in a little bit of that story that we all hope that maybe King will continue on with. What happened to Roland after Gabrielle Deschaines' fate. Between then and, when we meet him at the beginning of The Gunslinger, we know there's a lot that happened in there. We don't know much really about what that was, and so here's another little segment of it.
Yeah.
It's impressive that King can write a book and place it in between 7 books and still make it its own book, and you can read it without having read the other 7 books. It's very impressive to tell a story like that.
And not only is it in between 7 books in the contemporary story, it's between the stories of the past as well. So there's 2 juggling jobs he has to do here. He has to recreate the current quartet, and then he has to recreate young Roland at that time in his life when he's sort of bumming around the castle looking after court because he's depressed by what happened after he got back from Mages. And so there's 2 different eras that he has to get his head back into and be convincing to say, yeah, this is Roland when he was 15 or so, and this is Roland in the present as well.
Yeah. I liked how with the main story too, like with the Wind Through the Keyhole, that he also ties Roland just telling the story. He's emotionally reconnecting with his mother as well, which I thought was another nice touch. So King does a lot of different layers in this book, and it's a very tight story, which because with King's last couple of books, like they're long and I love them, but to get a smaller book like this, a 300-page book, it's really tight, and there's something to be said at times for a tight story. It really goes along quickly. The only thing I would say that this doesn't really seem like a kid's story to me, though. I think I wouldn't be telling this to a young child. It is a great story, though.
Yeah, but you have to realize this is a young child who's just witnessed probably things 10 times worse than anything that Roland tells in the story.
Yep.
And I think he's trying to relate to this boy, another boy who faced something equally harrowing and came out of it not only okay, but went on to greatness.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I rationalize this rather gruesome story that he's telling to terrify
Yeah. Yep.
Have you guys listened to the audio edition of it?
No.
I'm just starting it. A very long commute in my car, and that's where I listen to my audiobooks. So from January until about 3 or 4 days ago, I was listening to 11/22/63, and that's how long it took me.
Yeah.
So I just put it in 2 or 3 days ago, and so we're just getting to Gook. So it'll probably take me another maybe 8 weeks to listen to it. But it's always good to hear King reading his own material.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is. It gives something special to the story.
And there's always some surprises. I always forget, for example, how he pronounces Roland's last name.
Yep.
Because I tend to think of Deschaines,
Mm-hmm.
where he says Deschaines.
Yeah.
And I think the first time I heard Cuthbert pronounced, I always thought Cuthbert. So well, this is the way the author thinks it was.
Yeah, it's amazing, eh?
Even the word, even the little town they go to, Gook, where they hole up for the Stark Blast, I'm thinking Gook.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, since English isn't my first language. I often noticed afterwards that I've pronounced stuff the wrong way.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Bev. The one part of the story that King kind of doesn't want to dwell in too much, I guess, or he doesn't feel is as important, is the catalyst for what causes Ole Lang to become a skin man, is this green flashing whatever that they find in the salt mines. Do you think this is, and I think the foreman's or the oldest salt miner says it's just something from the old people. I'm wondering, do you think it was maybe just one of the Wizard's 13 globes, or?
Actually, I didn't think that. I was thinking that it was more something along the lines of tack.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole thing about going into the hole in the mine and seeing something glowing on the other side reminded me so much of the similar scenes in Desperation, where Tack sort of speaking through the hole.
Oh, okay.
In the Wizards 13, yeah, I'd never really considered that, but I think the history of what we know about where they all ended up and how they all ended up didn't make me think that there would be one that close to Gilead, for example.
Mm-hmm.
in later points in the Dark Tower series, we find out where they all went. I just thought of the Toadash creatures between the spaces and the attack from Desperation, the way he infused the people in Desperation. Basically they became shapeshifters in a way.
Mm-hmm.
To my mind, it was just something more akin to that.
Okay, that's interesting. And I also found the name that he chose for this storm, the Stark Blast. At first, I thought maybe it was a Game of Thrones reference, but because of the main family in there, one of the main families in that series is the Starks. But I did a little digging, and I understand that one of the writers on the Discordia online
Yes.
Interactive adventure that they have, his last name is Stark. So
Brian Stark. Yes,
yeah,
that's
Brian
right.
Stark.
I hadn't actually made that connection. I was thinking more of George Stark.
Yeah, I was thinking of him too. Yeah, and I also like there was some nice subtle tie-ins to the to the main Dark Tory storyline. Susanna's having some cravings for some nasty, maggoty food.
Mm-hmm.
Was a throwaway line, and also the references to there will be water if God wills it.
Yes, and Bix mentions Andy in his horoscopes.
Yes, Andy. Yeah.
The people of the Kala further down, who he describes as rice farmers, and even the general store that they pass, that's empty. It's Took's Outland Mercantile. Took's was the store in Caliburn Sturgis too.
Right.
So It's like the Took family. They didn't have just the Kalas; they were sort of further out.
Yes. There's a lot of good stuff in there. It's a pretty slick piece of writing, I have to say, for sure.
I think you have to read the book several times to catch all the connections
Exactly.
to the other.
Yeah, and for me, I've only read it once so far, so I need to go back into it again. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in this story. I really enjoyed it.
I think the one thing that in Wizard and Glass we really got to know Cuthbert and Elena. And I didn't come away from this one feeling like I really knew very much about Jamie DeCurry.
Yes, I agree.
He's he's not a very talkative person to begin with, so there's that handicap. And plus, he gets sent off on missions, so he's not even present for that sort of interlude story very much. So I didn't come away with the same. Cuthbert, he's larger than life. I think everybody who's read that knows him. And Alana to a lesser extent, but there's enough of him there that you really got a feel for who he was, but not so much with Jamie, I thought. Yeah.
And the King shows his hand at creating characters very, very well again. I even like Bix, the ferryman. He's hardly in the story, but he made quite the impression on me. Probably more than some of the other characters in the book that had larger spots in the story. So I really kind of wondered if he made it back to the other side okay before the storm hit. Like I was invested in what happened to him. So I thought that was really well done.
I think there will be more Dark Tower books. I think King has more things he wants to explore with the Dark Tower world.
He's intrigued by Everlyn. He said there's a lot more about Everlyn that... what the quote he said to me once was that Everlyn knows a lot about the Deschênes family.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly that's where Gabrielle went to sequester herself while Roland was off in Magus. And so there seems to be some history there. I mean, Gabrielle Deschênes grew up in that area. Not in Debaria exactly, but in the outer fringes. And it's not that far from Gilead that I think that, clearly she knows more about that, found out even in that story.
Yeah. So you think we'll see more Dark Tower books?
There just seems to be this cycle. And it goes back as far as, the early 1980s, where every so often this story reemerges in his mind. And there are periods in between the actual books themselves, especially in the 90s, when it seemed like the story was always on his mind. But I think in another 4 or 5 or 6 years, to me it just seems inevitable that there'll be something else. Roland speaks to him. I think he hears Roland in his dreams, and every now and then Roland says, I've got a story to tell. Because this book, The Wind Through the Keyhole, wasn't originally going to be a Dark Tower story. It was going to be a fairy tale. And he did this interview with himself on his website, and he said at some point Roland came in and said, hey, wait a minute, buddy, this is my story. The Skinwalker story was going to be something else. And it's just like Roland said, no, this is all part of me. This is my story. And I think that Roland will probably speak up again. I hope so.
Yeah. And having read the story, I just have to say, because the cover art from the U.S. version was always intriguing to me. But once you read the story, the what's in that picture is it's just a fantastic book covers too. I really like it.
One of the
Yeah,
other interesting things that people have been talking about is the Marvel graphic novels, and how their trajectory of the story of Roland after Mages went, and how this book is at odds with that.
Mm.
I mean, in the Marvel series, after Gabrielle Duchesne dies, Roland is arrested as a suspect for having killed her, and there's a whole story that goes on with that. And there's no way that this story from the Wind Through the Keyhole could possibly fit into that context. So I think if there was ever any question in people's minds about whether the comic should be taken as canon, I think this probably answers it more clearly than anything else.
Hmm.
Do you think King did that on purpose to mark that the story is the written one?
I think that there's a lot of projects that tie into his material where he sort of gets them off on a good footing and then he lets them go. He trusts the people who were involved in them, but he sort of steps back and lets them work out whatever they want to work out. And I think that's probably the way the Marvel stuff went eventually. He in the early days, he told them a bunch of stories. During their original brainstorming session, he just sort of reeled off story after story after story, and then sort of said, you guys go ahead and run with that. But I don't think he's said whatever they've come up on their own in terms of storylines independent of that. I don't think he wants that to influence his own ideas about Midworld. I think it's possible that Jericho Hill, for example, which is written in the comics, I think if King ever decided to write Jericho Hill, I don't think he would feel like he's obliged to follow what was written in the comics. I look at them as expanded universe rather than canon.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you something else, Bev. In the last podcast, we talked a bit about limited edition, and we mentioned that today it feels like a limited edition isn't as limited as it was before, with both Scribner and Hodder doing their own limit, not even real signature in them, and so. What are your feelings about the limiteds today?
My feeling on limiteds has changed a lot over the years, and I'm not so interested in limited editions anymore that don't have any added value. If they're just a signature added, like the Scribner limited of Under the Dome, which I think it came with a deck of cards or something like that too, but that didn't interest me. If there's something that's only in a limited edition that you can't get anywhere else, then that will interest me. But I've really stepped away from collecting limited editions to a large part. I got a copy of the artist edition of Wind Through the Keyhole from Grant because I really like Jay Lee's artwork, and that's something that you couldn't get in the Scribner edition, for example. Plate glued into the front with a signature on it, or a simulated autograph, and those don't interest me in the least. I know that there are collectors who are completists. They have to have everything. I'm not in that camp anymore. There was a time when I could never have seen myself giving up, selling or getting rid of any of my limited editions. And I think I've gotten a lot more mercenary about that over the years. Now I look at some of these books and say, I forgot I had this on the shelf even. What good is it doing me? I might as well let somebody else have it who would appreciate it more if there's somebody out there who's interested in it. Because really, to me, ultimately, and I think it's King's idea too, is that the story is the main thing. The package can be very nice, and I really like what Cemetery Dance did with the 25th anniversary edition. Artwork is something that will interest me in an edition, like I said, the Lilja and Grant artist's copy. But yeah, if it's just a signature, to me that's not a limited edition that I'd be interested in anymore.
And it seems like today there are more like the trade edition, but then they add a signature and then they call it limited. It's really almost the same book.
Well, and there is precedent for that in the past too. In books like Cujo that came out in a limited edition, it was the inside of the book was exactly the same. It had a signature page, but the text itself was the same. It had a different cover, maybe a different quality of paper, but the book itself was essentially the trade edition. The ones that I really have always liked over the years are things like 6 Stories, which even though the stories became available later on, that book itself, the presentation itself, doesn't exist in any other form. And I really enjoy that sort of a book.
Yeah, I agree.
And now, we visit the King Crate and see what Miss Treasures, the Fluffy the Crate creature from Creepshow, has left for us to examine.
We're going to talk to Bev Vincent about his book, The Stephen King Illustrated Companion, which is a beautiful book with a lot of stuff that has never been seen before, at least. And I want to ask you, Bev, how did you get to do that one?
This was an interesting project. I got an email one day to my Hotmail address, which 90% of the time, most of what I get there is spam. And it was from this company out in Seattle called Becker and Meyer. And they identified themselves as book packagers. And that was a concept I wasn't familiar with. And so I was not sure what was going on here. I thought maybe this was another kind of spam. So I asked around to a few people, and book packagers are essentially publishers who produce books for other publishers. And they're usually ones which have a lot of design elements to them. They have a lot of photography, they have inserts, they could be pop-up books and things like that. And so they produce these books under contract for another publisher. I would strongly suspect the pop-up version of The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon was probably produced by somebody else for Scribner, for example. And so this book packager had been approached by the publishing wing of Barnes & Noble, which is a group called Sterling Press. And they had a line of Reader's Companions books. They had previously done one on Jane Austen and one on Edgar Allan Poe. And Barnes & Noble wanted to do the same thing with Stephen King. And based on The Road to the Dark Tower, the people at Becker and Meyer contacted me and asked if I would be interested in writing this Reader's Companion. And the concept was that it would be a combination of biography and lightweight literary criticism, let me say. Nothing too in-depth, but something that mapped King's life to what he was working on at the time and to see how the two influenced each other. And so it wasn't going to be a comprehensive look at all of King's work, which would be basically, I think, a life's work because he's got so many books. But it was fairly limited in scope, and I was given a fairly small word count to pull this off. But then it would be illustrated by not only standard artwork, but by documents. And that's one of the things Becker and Meyer was famous for, was these little pockets of documents that you could take out and examine, and they were reproduced in a way that made them look sort of like the originals. And so they sent me a copy of their earlier ones, and for example, with the Poe book, which is a smaller format, it's maybe only about half the height of the book, but the same other dimensions. You can pull out the New York Times front page from the day that Poe died, and it's got his obituary, and it feels like a newspaper from back in the 19th century. I was intrigued by this, and because it was Barnes & Noble, a fairly reputable bookseller, that gave us a little bit of leverage in terms of getting King's cooperation with this. And so he opened up his archives at the University of Maine to the documents researcher, and he said, I get final approval on anything that you want, but go in and pick out what you'd like to do, and I'll say yay or nay on it. Plus also a photo album at his office, which he allowed us to reproduce a lot of pictures from his childhood and early parts of his career and things like that. And so as I was writing this book, I picked 10 or 11 novels from King's career, and it was a bit of a juggling act because I could easily have gotten bogged down in the 1970s. It's easy to write about Carrie and Salem's Lot and The Shining and The Stand. There's so much good material from back there, but I wanted to cover his entire career up to that point. So I looked for books that had a significant autobiographical component to them, or ones where something interesting was going on in King's life at the time that he was working on them, so that there would be touch points back and forth between the novels and the books. So, for example, Lisey's Story, which isn't one of his most famous novels, but that one was inspired by his near-death experience. He came down with an infection and spent a lot of time in the hospital. And while he was in the hospital, his wife sort of renovated his office. And when he came out, he said it was like he died. Everything was all packed up in boxes. So he extrapolated from that, if I had died, what would be my wife's experience from that point on, and also the people who would be interested in all the ephemera of his life and trying to find, unpublished manuscripts and things like that. So there was a novel that arose out of a autobiographical element. And so the documents researcher went in and he just kept finding all sorts of really cool things that, for the most part, matched up with what I was writing about. So if I was writing about Bag of Bones, he'd find manuscript pages from Bag of Bones, and One of the most interesting ones to me was in The Shining. He found in the manuscript of The Shining a passage from the first draft manuscript where Danny first encounters the fire hose. And in general, the event plays out the same way as it was published, but the perspective of it is different. In one version, it could be a hallucination, and in the other one, it's very clearly a tangible, real-life encounter with a moving fire hose. And to see how that changed, that was the sort of thing that I was interested in including to show people, because few people have any access to the archives at the University of Maine. And then I got in touch with a friend of mine named Bob Jackson, who lives up in Amarillo, and he's probably the uber collector. If anybody has it, Bob probably has it. And he allowed the documents researcher to go in and photograph and reproduce some of the documents that he has, like the telegram from Doubleday that King got when he sold Carey, and the covers of some of the University of Maine journals that King's early poems and stories were published in, and things like that. So the book has my words in it, but for me, really, all of the added material is what, even to me, is what's interesting. You know, I can sit there and look at the book for hours and not even read anything that I wrote about it. But I have to say, I'm very proud of the way the book came out. They decided early on to increase the of it just to give it more scope in terms of the reproductions and the included documents. And there's just some really, really cool stuff in here.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very fascinating book too. You can sit and looking in it for hours.
Yeah, I mean, we got some pages from short stories that King wrote when he was just a kid. Some of the Lisbon high school newspapers that he published in, some of his articles from the University of Maine newspaper, and just the early drafts. I mean, as a writer, I'm interested in the way things evolve. And some of these manuscript excerpts have his annotations, or his editor's annotations, or his wife's annotations in some cases, as his first reader, where she's making suggestions. In Bag of Bones, most notably, where she has some suggestions about the very opening sections of it. That sort of stuff really fascinates me.
Was there something King didn't allow you to use?
To the best of my knowledge, there was nothing that he said no to. I wasn't directly involved in that, but I think there was one document that had an address on it that he asked them to digitally remove that one piece of information, but I think that was the only thing that he didn't let us do.
Was there anything that you looked at that wasn't put in the book due to space restrictions?
I think there were a few, like some of the early short stories, we only reproduced like one section, and there were like 4 or 5 sections to the way it was published, and we only did one section. There was probably a lot more that we didn't use, but I think we really got the best of the batch in it.
Cool. Yeah, because one of the things that Hans and I hope to do with this segment of the podcast is to point out things that of interest to King's fans that, like, in regards to the conversation we had a bit earlier about limited edition stuff, this is stuff that's price-wise is accessible to the average person out there and gives good value for the money. And from my perspective, this book gives way more value than what it's being charged for when it was originally published. Because, like, if you follow anybody for a period of time, our autobiographical material, you tend to see the same articles over, the same pictures, and this book has stuff in it I've never seen anywhere else. So it's just an amazing collection of stuff. And as you've mentioned, all these reproductions are very cool to see, of handwritten notes on early drafts of manuscripts and things like that. It's just a really fantastic value for the money. And I urge people out there, if they're interested in King and they want to see some new stuff, that this is a book you want to hunt down. It's no longer being printed, is it, Bev?
That's correct. Yeah. We did a second printing, which was, I think, the same print run as the original. And then, for whatever reason, Barnes & Noble decided not to do a third printing. So if you go to barnesandnoble.com, there are copies being sold, like, in their secondary market. For a while, the cheapest one was really expensive, but there's been some lately that have been, in the $15 or $20 range. I think if you go to Barnes & Noble stores, there are some stores that will still have stock.
Right.
But the warehouse no longer has any stock.
Right.
But I was really flabbergasted by the cover price is $25.
Right.
There were a lot of periods where it was being sold for 50% off.
Barnes
& Noble produces these things. I mean, they're almost, some people call them instant remainders. You'll find them next to the cash register in the gift book section. having seen what they did with this book made me go back and reevaluate that section of the store because I dismissed a lot of it. But Becker and Meyer has done some really interesting books. They did one on Kurt Cobain that had a CD in the back that had spoken word dialogue by him, which it was nowhere else to be found. They did one on Marilyn Monroe. I mean, depending on what your interests are, they probably have a book there, and it's probably got a lot of stuff in it that you've never seen. So, yeah, no, I tend to pay more attention to these cheap gift edition hardcovers section of the store because there's some pretty impressive books being put out there.
Yeah, and to our listeners out there, I just really want to urge if you want to get this book, you're probably getting to near the end of the window where it's going to be cheap. This book's been out since 2009. Now I know, Bev, you just said on the Barnes and Noble pages there's still some good prices there, but I know I checked here in Canada, and Amazon, like used copies are going for $70, and new copies are priced at $115. So as this book is out longer and people are picking it up, there's nowhere but for the price to go up. So if you want to get this book, you have a window of opportunity to get it at a reasonable price, and I highly recommend that you go out and look for it as soon as possible.
Yeah, if you go right now, right this minute, I see three copies for $10 or less.
See, there you go.
I agree.
But then they go up. The next one's $20, and then the next one's $35, and then $65, and they just keep going up from there.
Yeah. It's just an amazing book.
One thing I would recommend too is that you check on the condition, because the way these books were shipped, a lot of them went to the stores just sort of 10 books in a cardboard box without much packing.
Right.
So there tend to be dings and dents in the spine and the cover. So if you're concerned about pristine condition, make sure you check with the seller. And the seller may have gotten it originally that way, but if that's the sort of thing that's of concern to you, by all means check that out.
Yeah, I would say get it anyway if it's not too pricey.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what I find extra fascinating with this is just the fact that the reproduced documents and stuff. I mean, you can probably read about some of this stuff in other places, but the fact that they have reproduced the documents and it's like actually picking up the real document. Mm-hmm. I think that's what.
Yeah, if there was a coffee stain on the original, there was a coffee stain on the reproduction. That's how faithful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's you can't get that anywhere else.
So that was our King Crate segment with Bev Vincent about his excellent book, The Stephen King Illustrated Companion. And it's an excellent book. I highly recommend that you seek it out. And we want to thank Bev very much for being on for not just the discussion about his book, but also the review that he did with us for Wind Through the Keyhole. And if you are interested in finding out more about Bev, please check out his site at Bev Vincent. www.bevvincent.com, and you'll find his main page there, and it's a portal to everything that he's done, and his message board and articles that he's written and books that he's written as well, and he also does book reviews from there. So please check out Bev's site at www.bevvincent.com. And thanks again, Bev.
Thanks, Bev.
And now on to Marv's mailbag.
Yes, and we haven't gotten that many questions, but we have one from Niklas Coulson. I hope I pronounced that right.
Sounds good.
Who asks why Stephen King don't like to Twitter. And I'm afraid we really can't speak for him on that behalf, but from experience, he's never been very active on the internet in any way or form. He's often have people do that for him, and if he have had a message he wants to get out to the fans, he's often given it to someone on his board to post for us to read. So
yeah,
I can't say I'm surprised that he doesn't Twitter.
No,
I don't really know.
Yeah, well, he's a very busy man, so that's something that he probably doesn't have a lot of time for, and it might just be a generational thing that he's just not used to doing that. I know his son Joe Hill quite active on the web, so I just think it might be a bit of a generational thing too.
Yeah, that's true. Then we have a question from JJ Mahoney, who wants to know which Dark Tower connection we think are the best, and which Dark Tower connected book we think are a must read. Any thoughts on that?
Well, JJ, that is a very good question. I definitely think that Salem's Lot with the Father Callahan story is very important. Beyond that, I think the Talisman and Black House. I think it's Black House. So I think those two stories.
Black House,
yeah, those two stories are nicely connected as well. And I'm hoping that if Peter Straub and Stephen King schedules work out, that they will do that third book and hopefully explore that connection a bit more. Beyond that, I'm hard pressed to think of like there's Insomnia, that there's so many Needful Things. They all have connections to it. So Needful Things is probably, or
Yeah,
Hearts of
so many
Atlantis
connections.
is also another one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I actually, when you mentioned Black House, I was actually a bit disappointed that it was connected to be a Dark Tower book when I read it the first time.
Ah, interesting.
I felt that the Talisman and the Talisman world was such a strong world in itself that I didn't really feel that it had to be connected to the Dark Tower, that it could stand for itself. But I like it more and more the more I read it. But my first thought was that I was a bit disappointed that it was connected to the Dark Tower.
Very good.
Yeah, but my favorite connection is probably the connection with the Stand, when the gunslingers find out about Plague and how it's the world. I can't remember if it's in the ending of the third book or the beginning of the fourth, but it's somewhere there. And I think that's probably my favorite connection.
Very good.
Yeah, and we have one last question from Alex Callahan. I think that's right. Which Dark Tower novel do you consider to be the best and why? And he also asks us to no spoilers, please. I'm not sure if he hasn't read the books and want to start with the one we think is the best.
Okay. Well, Callahan, that's a good last name for a Dark Tower kind of question, too.
Definitely.
Yes. For me, my favorite one is the second book, The Drawing of the Three. I just love the whole concept of Roland pulling his quartet together from behind these doors, and the fact that he's injured on the beach as well. Sets up some very interesting repercussions to the rest of the series as well. So, and I just found it without getting into spoilers, I just liked how the story came back to address some issues or points raised in the first book that I thought made Roland hard to like as a character in the first book. They addressed those and deepened into his character. So that's why, and it had introduced us to his, all the members of his quartet as well, which I really enjoyed because I thought they were all great characters to meet for the first time.
Yeah, I would have to say book number 3, The Wastelands. I think the story in it is just amazing, and it happens so many things in that book. So I think that's the book I enjoy the most.
Okay.
And of course, I actually like the last book. Without saying too much, I like the ending of this last book. The ending has tendency to divide the fans in those who like it and those who really don't like it.
Most endings do.
But yeah, but I'm one of those who likes it. So I actually think that's the only way the book could end.
Yeah,
I can't imagine any other way.
Yeah, for me, endings are probably not as important as the journey. I'm much more a journey person, and what happens to these characters over the 7 books is more interesting than the actual ending. But for me, as the ending feels honest, that's the main criteria that I have. And I think the ending, well, no, I don't think. I feel that the ending for the Dark Tower was the honest ending.
Yeah, and I think it was such a build-up for the ending as well. You waited and waited and waited, and you finally got it, and you were actually happy with it. So I think that may have made the book feel better than it actually was, maybe. I don't know, but I like it. Do you have a least favorite Dark Tower book?
Well, this answer is probably going to, again, divide people. And it's not because I don't think the book is well written, but it took the story to a place that I didn't want it. I was not as interested at the time when it came out because, we were waiting years between books too. So at the end of book 3 or book 4, I guess, I was really looking forward to, the story continuing. And while I like the backstory in Wizard and Glass,
yeah,
finding out about Roland's backstory, and I thought that it's a tragically beautifully written love story. It's not where I wanted the story to go at the time. I wanted the quest to the Dark Tower to continue. So I find that book is a nice addition to the story, but I think you could pull out a lot of that backstory and it wouldn't really affect the overall arc of the main storyline.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it slowed down the pace of the story a little bit too much. As you say, you wanted to know what happened to the quartet,
Yep.
And so I agree with you. Number 4 is the least favorite if you have to pick
Yeah,
one.
but that's an interesting that you and me are on the same wavelength because I'm pretty sure or comfortable in saying I know a lot of people put that as their most favorite book. So it just shows
Yeah,
you the flexibility of the Dark Tower structure that people can like different books but still like the overall
yeah,
story equally. So,
yeah. Why, while you mentioned, while we talk about which book we like the most, I have to push for a voting that I have on my site
oh yes.
where I want 10,000 fans to vote on their favorite book. And the reason I want 10,000 to vote is because I feel that you have to have a big number of voters to get some kind of true result.
Hmm.
So I don't know if I picked too many, but there are still, as we record this, there are 7,843 votes missing. So head over there and vote, people.
You heard him.
We can pick the number one book.
Hmm.
Maybe it will be Dark Tower 4.
I've already voted, so.
Yeah, that's great. Not for Dark Tower 4, I guess.
No, I didn't. No.
No.
Actually, not even a Dark Tower book.
Okay. There are actually there are 66 books listed, and there are 3 books that hasn't got one vote yet.
Ah,
So
interesting.
should be interesting to see if they get one before the 10,000 has voted.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, that's it for the questions.
Alrighty. And if you remember from our previous podcast, there was a contest being run from the Richard Matheson interview that Hans did with him about Battleground. And Hans is now here to announce the winner.
Yes, and the question was what other King project that Richard Matheson almost worked on. And the correct answer is, of course, Insomnia. They were planning on doing TV series on. And our lucky winner is David Spell from Hudsonville, Michigan. And you will get a copy of the Battleground book sent to you. And I hope you really enjoy that one. I know I did when I read it.
Yes, it looks like a fantastic book. I'm actually kind of jealous, Dave, so I hope you really enjoy the book. And please, once you get it, give us your feedback on what you think of it.
So, that's it for the podcast this time. To all our listeners, stay safe, but stay scared.